Today I wanted to do just a brief guide / showcase on detailed paint jobs, emblem work, weathering, things of that nature, and I'm just going to use my Blade AC as an example, and so this one was made to look like an old piece of construction equipment with rust and wear, and like it was taken and turned into an AC. And we'll also add some battle damage and some Gunpla-like decal and sticker work to make the design really jump out. So when you're doing your base layer of paint, you usually want to avoid the all option. In my experience, you can usually get better results if you go through the pieces individually and choose which parts you want to be what color. And of course you want to line up all of your colors, so all the yellows should generally be the same, if that's the aesthetic you're going for. Your blacks, your grays, things like that. They should be the same, but it's sometimes good to put them under different things, so your main sub 1, sub 2. For this job in particular, I chose all the large metal plates to make yellow and everything else black or gray. So for decals, we're going to jump into the legs first, and I usually start with my weathering layers, and so this one is going to be rust and water damage, things like that. And I'm focusing on joints and places that I think might rust, might collect water. The devil's in the details. And I'm trying to make it look as believable and realistic as possible. So the joints, rivets, things like that, I think are where rust is most likely to collect. If you're using the same decal over and over to weather stuff, try not to use the same orientation, and then stretch it in different ways to make it really big one way, shrink it down. Things like that will help create a little bit of diversity and realism so every single place you put it doesn't look the same. And there's lots of spots, especially if you're doing something like rust or just general weathering, where it's actually nice to go really big and stretch it out as much as you can to cover a wide area. While on other places, you'll see me zoom in and get pretty detailed, or I might stretch it really long to weather a whole section, or to cover a whole joint or area. And then after weathering, we're going to move into things like decals, model numbers. I always like a good model number. It makes me feel like it's, closer to like the boxed model kits you would buy. And the little triangles that you see me putting on are something that you see a lot in the Gundam universe. And so at the ends of their legs or armor plates, they might have various little lines, decals, points, things like that. And I think it just adds a little bit of extra detail to everything. Here I've got a barcode going on. It's a construction worker, so I thought it rather fitting. Then I'm going to put some radioactive signs towards the back end of the legs where the boosters are at. Kojima particles are radioactive after all. And then to really show that wear and tear from battle, I start adding in some bullet holes. So an interesting thing you can do with your decals is, depending on the angle you place them, they will stretch out. And so this one I'm putting at a really sharp angle, so it'll go from just a regular bullet hole to stretching out across that piece of armor. And so you can get an effect that looks like a bullet hit the side and kind of glanced off and scraped it all the way down, as opposed to just the holes on the front. And you can do the same thing with the rust and the other weathering aspects. I usually start with the legs and then work my way into the core. So here's an example of going really big and covering a lot of area at once with that rust, as opposed to just little details. You do have a limited amount of layers, so sometimes it's nice to go really large. And it's usually something you'll do with your weathering patterns or solid blocks of color, which I'll cover in a different video. And you'll see as I start to put stuff on here, there's probably a lot of spots that you couldn't really see with the naked eye, but I still find it quite satisfying, and it makes for great pictures, videos, things like that, even if you wouldn't actually see it during gameplay. And here's some more radioactive signs for the boosters. There's kind of a hinged joint on that front shield plate, and so I put my warning keep latched closed, some more arrows to tie into the legs. Just something to make it a little more interesting than a plain sheet of yellow metal. Again, I love a good model number, so I'll put it back here, and I try to fit it within the joints and make it look as realistic as possible. Where would somebody actually paint that on? In the back of the cockpit, a warning risk of death decal I thought was appropriate. Some more bullet holes. And for this one, it's got a lot of shields on the left side, so the left side of the core, the leg, the actual shield. And so I feel like that's where the bullet fire would be most concentrated and most intercepted by the armor of the AC, and so that's where I concentrate my bullet holes. And then on the sides, where it's got a much sharper angle, I do like before, and I position the decal at that really sharp angle so it looks like the bullet's hitting from the front and just kind of glancing off of it, since it's such a sharp angle. And then a few little bullet holes, you know, being attacked from the side, something like that. And then from the bullet holes, we'll just kind of do some last-minute details. I've got a hatch sign as well, some more arrows. And I went with the red for the glow, so it really looks like lights you would find on construction equipment. I feel like it goes really nice with that yellow. There's a little, you know, hatch sign as well. And at the beginning, before I start really painting my ACs, I like to go through and make a lot of decals that would be kind of multi-purpose. So things like warning labels, hatches, and other labels that you might find on large equipment. The radioactive sign, I've got a bullet sign, fire hazards, I've got a Kojima particle warning label, things like that, things that I think are kind of naturally in the universe and fit the aesthetic. And then you can go a little bit more specialized depending on kind of what the overall theme is. The rest, for example, I wanted this one to look really old and weathered, but I really wouldn't use it in some other designs that are much more kind of kept up and maintained. So these shoulders do hold your shoulder parts. That's why they're so big, as you get dual shoulder weapons on this one, which for this is used to increase my blade strength with energy amplifiers. But I think it's an appropriate place to put like a little ammo decal, or I could do maybe like an energy, like Kojima particle thing, something more related to the blade. And again, just some final details with, you know, hatch markers, things like that. And I do experiment around with using a large black triangle to cover up big blocks of color, but decide against it. Doesn't really fit the aesthetic of this AC specifically. And while legs and cores take a lot of decal work in general, arms you can usually get away with a little bit less. Some more triangles on the arms to match the legs armored plating. And I end up doing, as I'm going through the left arm, I put bullet holes in that and realized that I hadn't quite done it on the right side yet. And so I end up going back and putting my bullet holes there. And so while the right shoulder is kind of holding ammo, I put some radioactive signs on the left, another barcode label. Again, seems very fitting just for that construction aesthetic I was going for. And I would vary up the sizes you use for your bullet holes. After all, chances are that the AC is being shot with all kinds of different caliber and sized rounds. So there I use a really big one, maybe it's a grenade or a tank shot, and I put it just on the corner, so again it looks like an explosion or a shell hit just the very tip, and so there's not this giant black hole sitting on my arm, but it helps provide that kind of battle-worn and weathered look. And there are spots where you can't place decals, and so that's something that varies from part to part a lot of times, and so you have to kind of experiment with where you can place stuff. But at the same time, sometimes you can get interesting effects by overlapping into those areas that you can't place decals at, and so it'll, you know, cut off the piece of decal that would go there. So that was an example on that really like far right shoulder joint that had just cut off that bullet hole. And so for the head, I figure it's shielded by all those big plates, and so I just put the one label on it. I do a couple of bullet holes used to weather it. And again, it's at such a sharp point that the bullets are probably hitting and glancing off, and then I just do a radioactive decal on the back of it. And here is the overview. You can see all those details in there, the warning labels on the back, around the boosters, the caution, you know, possibility of death or injury. And the shield automatically will put your emblem on the front of it. And so I just used that barcode again because I thought it fit the aesthetic rather than having a different logo. Construction equipment probably wouldn't have its own separate logo after all. We'll just take a couple of seconds to look at some stills from it. I think it turned out quite nicely. I'm glad I went with just the solid black blade on the right side. Well, there's some shades of gray, but it lacks all of that yellow. And I thought it looked really nice with just the black core, blade, and head, and things that aren't protective armor being black, and then leaning into that yellow construction equipment coloring for the big plates of armor. And here you can take a look closer at the front and the underside. Really happy with those red lights. And that's just the glow color of the AC, but these especially look like those construction lights you would see on heavy equipment. Then here's a closer look at the legs. You can see the model number, some of the rust work, or just spots where the paint's supposed to look worn, those bullet holes. And be cognizant of your bullet holes. I had to rotate the legs a lot so it looked like they were hit from the front and not from the top. It wasn't its natural alignment that the camera wanted me to put them at. Here's a look at the other leg. Again, that big shield area is where I concentrated most of my bullets, as well as you can see that stretched, kind of glancing one off the side. And then again, the rust and weather details. Those arrow markers I was talking about that you see a lot on the big plates or certain joints of pieces on various models. Here's a look at that armored piece of the shield, the warning label, since it looks like there's hinges there not to open the hatch. Then here's a look at the other side. Again, the model number, hatch sign, the joint arrows, the glancing bullets coming off the side, and some spots that'll be relatively hidden by the arms. But I'm a completionist at heart, and so I couldn't not put in the rust and weathering on the sides, even if it's going to be a little bit under the arms. We have our arms with the live ammo decals that I had made. And these arms are fairly limited on where you can place the decals. Here we have the back of the core, that warning risk of death, those radioactive warning labels, the boosters, and presumably where the main generator and things are obviously would be a very dangerous location and so warrants some of your warning decals. And then here's just the overall schematic for it. Some of the internal parts may change, but I think body-wise, it's pretty much right where I want it to be. So let me know in the comments what you think about this type of video. Do you want me to go more in-depth on the decals, how to come up with paint, how to weather it, maybe some designs more specifically inspired, by Gundam or other mecha? Do you want me to do an in-depth tutorial all about that? Or maybe just some quick showcases of some of my favorite paint jobs? I'm certainly open, so if it's something you're interested in, definitely let me know, and more videos will be on the way. That's it for this one. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.